Alexandra took a deep breath as she stood outside the massive wooden doors that led to Maxwell Reid's office. The hallway was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant ringing of phones. She checked her watch. 2:15 p.m. She was right on time for their meeting, but for once, being punctual didn't bring her any comfort. She smoothed down her navy blue blazer, the expensive fabric unable to calm her racing heart. At 32, she had worked incredibly hard to get where she was. Top of her class at law school, followed by 7 years of barely sleeping as she climbed the ranks at Reid Enterprises. Now, as the youngest senior counsel in company history, she had finally earned respect in the cutthroat world of corporate law. But today wasn't about work. Today was about the secret she'd been carrying for 8 weeks. Twins. The word still felt strange, like it belonged to someone else's life story. The doctor had confirmed it yesterday after her ultrasound. "Congratulations, you're having twins," he had said with a smile that faded when he saw her expression. There was no husband waiting in the lobby, no partner to share the news with. Only her boss, Maxwell Reid, the 45-year-old billionaire CEO whose company she had dedicated her career to. The security guard nodded as she approached. "He's expecting you, Ms. Winters." When she walked in, Reid's office was bathed in afternoon light from the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. The space was bigger than her entire apartment, decorated with modern art pieces that probably cost more than her yearly salary. Reid sat behind his glass desk, his attention fixed on 3 computer screens, displaying charts and numbers that would determine the fate of thousands of employees. "Alexandra," he said without looking up, "the Peterson numbers are looking better than expected. Your contract revisions saved us millions." His voice carried the confidence of a man used to being the smartest person in every room. She closed the door behind her. That's good news, but I'm not here about Peterson." Something in her tone made him look up, his steel-gray eyes finally focusing on her. He was handsome in that powerful, unapproachable way that business magazines love to photograph. His dark hair was starting to gray at the temples, giving him what people called a distinguished look. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his fingers still typing something without needing to look at the keyboard. Alexandra walked toward his desk, suddenly aware of how dry her mouth felt. The plants, the view, the expensive furniture, it all felt like a movie set. This wasn't how she had pictured her life unfolding. "I'm pregnant," she said, the words hanging in the air between them. When he didn't immediately respond, she added, "With twins." His typing stopped. For 3 long seconds, the office was completely silent. "I see," he said finally, leaning back in his chair. His face gave away nothing, like he was reviewing a business proposal rather than hearing life-changing news. "And you're certain there?" "Yes," she cut him off. "I haven't been with anyone else." Their night together had been unplanned. The Tokyo merger celebration, too much champagne, the relief of closing a deal that had taken months of work. His hotel suite had a view of Mount Fuji. She remembered noticing that before other memories took over, his hand on her waist, her lips against his neck, the way the world seemed to disappear for a few hours. "We were careful," he said, more to himself than to her. Apparently not careful enough. Alexandra felt a flash of anger at his calm. "I'm not asking for anything, Maxwell. I just thought you should know before it becomes obvious." Reid stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city he practically owned. She could almost see the calculations running through his mind, the board's reaction, the stock price, the impact on the Peterson acquisition. "How far along?" he asked without turning around. 8 weeks. He nodded slowly. "Have you told anyone else?" "Just my doctor. And my sister Catherine knows I'm pregnant, but not about you." He turned to face her, his expression finally showing something beyond business interest. Was it worry? Fear? She couldn't tell. "This complicates things," he said, which might have been the understatement of the century. Alexandra felt her professional mask slipping. "You think I don't know that? I've worked 10 years to get where I am. The last thing I wanted was to become the pregnant lawyer sleeping with the boss. That's not who I am." Something shifted in his eyes at her words. He walked back to his desk and pressed a button on his phone. "Grace, cancel my meetings for the rest of the day." He looked up at Alexandra. We need to figure this out. As they sat down at the small conference table in the corner of his office, Alexandra realized that nothing would be the same after today. Their lives were now connected in a way neither of them had ever planned for. Whatever happened next would change everything, for her career, for his empire, and for the two tiny lives growing inside her that didn't care about corporate hierarchies or public scandals. The large conference room on the 86th floor had been cleared of all staff except for 5 people. Maxwell Reid sat at the head of the polished table, his fingers tapping an impatient rhythm on the wood. He had called this emergency meeting less than an hour after Alexandra had left his office, the weight of her news still settling on his shoulders like a heavy coat. "So let me get this straight," Vivian Chen said, breaking the tense silence. As Reid's PR director for the past decade, she had handled everything from sexual harassment accusations against board members to environmental protests outside their factories. But even she looked rattled. "Your company lawyer is pregnant, with twins. And you're the father." Reid nodded once, his jaw tight. "That's the situation." Thomas Kim, the chief financial officer, whistled low. "The stock is going to take a hit when this gets out. No way around it." "If it gets out," Reid corrected him, emphasis on the first word. "That's why we're here. To make sure it doesn't." Vivian shook her head, her sleek black bob swinging with the movement. "With all due respect, sir, that's not realistic. These things always find a way into the public eye, especially with someone as high profile as you." She leaned forward, her expression serious. "The board will demand your resignation if this gets out the wrong way. Your ex-wife will use this to renegotiate her settlement, and the Peterson acquisition could fall through." The room fell silent as everyone contemplated the billions potentially at stake. Reid had built Reid Enterprises from a small tech startup to a global powerhouse over 20 years. His face appeared on the cover of business magazines regularly. His divorce 3 years ago had been messy but quiet, thanks to careful PR management and a generous settlement. This scandal threatened to undo all of that careful work. "What about the lawyer, Alexandra?" asked Daniel Powell, Reid's longtime personal attorney. "What does she want?" "She says she's not asking for anything," Reid replied, though his tone suggested he didn't quite believe it. "They all say that at first," remarked Linda Hoffman, head of human resources, her first words since the meeting began. "But once the reality of raising 2 children sets in, especially in this city with these costs, she'll want security, financial support at minimum." "Alexandra isn't like that," Reid found himself saying, surprised by his own defensiveness. "She's worked her way up from nothing. Full scholarship to law school. Supports her mother back in Ohio. She's not looking for a payout." Vivian raised an eyebrow at his detailed knowledge of Alexandra's background but didn't comment on it. "Regardless of her intentions, we need a strategy. I recommend a confidential agreement, generous terms, private health care at Mount Sinai, housing allowance, education fund for the children, all contingent on complete privacy." Daniel was already making notes. "I can have papers drawn up by morning." Reid nodded, though something about the clinical way they discussed the situation, discussed Alexandra and her unborn children, his children, left him feeling hollow. Meanwhile, across town, Alexandra sat curled up on her couch, a mug of tea growing cold on the coffee table in front of her. Her apartment was nice but small, a 1-bedroom with a view of the building next door rather than the park. She had always planned to upgrade once she made partner, but that timeline now seemed uncertain at best. "He's going to try to throw money at this and make it disappear," Catherine said, pacing the small living room. As Alexandra's older sister and only family in the city, she had rushed over the moment Alexandra called. "That's what men like him do." "You don't know him," Alexandra said quietly, though she wasn't sure why she was defending Reid. "I know his type," Catherine insisted. "I've seen it 100 times in my practice." As a family court attorney, Catherine had witnessed the ugliest sides of parenthood and power dynamics. "He'll try to silence you with money, but those children deserve recognition. They deserve their father's name, not just his bank account." Alexandra sighed, pressing her fingers against her temple where a headache was forming. "It's more complicated than that, Kath. I worked for him. I built my career at his company. If this gets out, I'll be labeled the secretary who slept her way to the top." "You're not a secretary, you're a lawyer. A damn good one. Doesn't matter." People love to tear down successful women. They'll said I trapped him, that I got pregnant on purpose to secure a meal ticket. Alexandra's voice cracked slightly. Everything I've worked for will be tainted. Catherine sat down next to her sister, taking her hand. So what are you going to do? I don't know yet, Alexandra admitted. But whatever happens, I need to protect myself professionally. These babies are coming whether Raid acknowledges them or not. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Raid, we need to meet again. Tomorrow. My home outside the city. Car will pick you up at 10. Catherine read the message over her shoulder and frowned. His home. Not the office. That's not a good sign. Alexandra felt a flutter of anxiety in her chest. He probably wants privacy. Can't risk being overheard at work. Or he wants you on his territory, where he has all the power. Catherine squeezed her sister's hand. Don't go alone. I have to, Alexandra said, her legal mind already analyzing the situation. If I show up with someone, especially another lawyer, it sets a confrontational tone. I need to hear what he has to say first. As night fell over the city, both Raid and Alexandra lay awake in their respective homes, minds racing with possibilities and consequences. Raid stared at the ceiling of his penthouse bedroom, thinking about the board meeting scheduled for next week and how this news would impact everything he built. Alexandra curled on her side, hand resting on her still flat stomach, wondering how she would provide for 2 children on her own if everything fell apart. Neither of them had planned for this twist in their carefully mapped lives. Neither was prepared for how their worlds would collide and transform in the coming days. But as the first light of dawn broke over the city skyline, one thing was certain. There was no going back to the way things were before. The black SUV with tinted windows wound its way through the tree-lined driveway leading to Maxwell Raid's estate. Alexandra peered out the window, taking in the sprawling grounds that seemed to go on forever. A perfectly manicured lawn stretched toward a forest on one side, while the other opened to reveal glimpses of ocean beyond. It was like something from a movie, not a place where real people lived. We're here, Ms. Winters, the driver announced as they pulled up to a modern mansion of glass and stone. The building seemed to rise organically from the landscape, all clean lines and open spaces. A fountain bubbled in the circular driveway, the morning sun making the water sparkle. Alexandra checked her reflection in her compact mirror one last time. She had chosen her outfit carefully, professional but not stiff, a light blue dress with a cream blazer that hid the slight nausea she still felt most mornings. She had debated for hours what to wear, which was silly considering the much bigger issues at stake. This way, please, said a woman in a crisp uniform who met her at the door. Alexandra followed her through a soaring entryway with ceilings that must have been 20 feet high. The house was surprisingly warm despite its grand scale, filled with modern art and comfortable-looking furniture rather than the cold showpieces she had expected. The housekeeper led her through the main house and out onto a stone terrace overlooking the ocean. The view was breathtaking, blue water stretching to the horizon, gulls circling lazily above. Maxwell Raid stood at the railing, his back to her, dressed more casually than she had ever seen him in dark jeans and a light sweater. Mr. Raid, the housekeeper announced. Ms. Winters has arrived. Raid turned, and for a moment, Alexandra thought she saw something like uncertainty flicker across his face before his usual confident expression returned. Thank you, Mrs. Torres. Could you bring us some refreshments? The herbal tea for Ms. Winters, please, no caffeine. Alexandra blinked, surprised he would think of such a detail. Please sit, he said, gesturing to a comfortable seating area with cushioned chairs arranged around a low table. The view helps me think. I thought we could both use some clarity today. She sat down, smoothing her dress nervously. Your home is beautiful. It's just a house, he replied, though they both knew it was much more than that. The estate had been featured in architectural magazines, its value estimated at over $40 million. They sat in awkward silence until Mrs. Torres returned with a tray holding a teapot, cups, and a plate of light pastries. Alexandra's stomach growled at the sight of food, reminding her she'd been too nervous to eat breakfast. Once they were alone again, Raid leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. I've been thinking about our situation. Our situation, Alexandra repeated. Is that what we're calling it? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. What would you prefer? Our predicament? Our unexpected development? Despite herself, Alexandra smiled too. Point taken. Raid's expression grew serious again. I've drafted an agreement, he began, reaching for a leather portfolio on the table. My team worked through the night on this. Of course they did, Alexandra thought. Raid was nothing if not efficient in a crisis. He slid the portfolio across the table to her. $50 million in a trust for the children. A separate $10 million for your discretion. The best medical care, education, everything they could need. He paused, watching her carefully. In exchange, this remains private. No public acknowledgement of paternity. Alexandra didn't touch the portfolio. She had expected this exact scenario, had prepared herself for it on the long drive here. What she hadn't prepared for was the hollow feeling in her chest as he laid out the terms. You want to buy my silence, she said quietly, and deny your own children. Raid frowned. I'm not denying them anything. I'm providing for them better than most fathers ever could. They'll want for nothing, except their father's name, his presence, the truth about where they came from. Alexandra shook her head slowly. Do you have any idea what it's like to grow up with a hole where a parent should be? I do. My father left when I was 4. My mother worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. This is hardly the same situation, Raid said, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. Your children won't be struggling financially. Money isn't everything, Maxwell. The use of his first name seemed to surprise them both. In the office, she always called him Mr. Raid. He stood up and walked to the railing again, his back to her as he looked out at the ocean. The wind ruffled his hair, making him look younger somehow, more human than the untouchable CEO she knew from work. My father was cold, he said suddenly, still looking out at the water. Successful, respected, but cold. He provided everything except what I actually needed from him. No approval, no guidance, just expectations and criticism. He turned to face her. I don't know how to be a father, Alexandra. I never planned to have children after the way I was raised. The vulnerability in his voice caught her off guard. This was a side of Maxwell Raid she had never seen, never even imagined it existed beneath his polished exterior. Nobody knows how to be a parent, she said more gently. We all just figure it out as we go. Raid ran a hand through his hair, a surprisingly human gesture from someone who always seemed so controlled. The board would demand my resignation if this becomes public. My ex-wife would use this to reopen our settlement. The company stock would plummet, he sighed. Thousands of jobs could be affected. It's not just about me. Alexandra understood the stakes better than most. As a corporate lawyer, she had seen firsthand how leadership scandals could tank even the most profitable companies. Raid returned to his seat across from her. Or, he said, his voice taking on a different tone, we could try another approach entirely. Alexandra raised an eyebrow. What kind of approach? One that might surprise everyone, including my board. He leaned forward. What if, instead of hiding this, we control the narrative? Get ahead of any potential leak. You mean, go public? Voluntarily? Alexandra couldn't hide her shock. This was the last thing she had expected from him. On our terms, Raid clarified, with a carefully crafted statement about 2 adults making responsible decisions about co-parenting. He watched her reaction closely. It would mean significant changes for both of us, public scrutiny, questions about our relationship, but it would also mean your children grow up without secrets. Alexandra felt her heart beating faster. Why would you even consider this? It goes against everything your team advised, I'm sure. Raid was quiet for a long moment before answering. Because last night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about a child, 2 children, growing up never knowing their father, being told he didn't want them known to the world, and I realized I didn't want to be my father after all. Alexandra stared at him, seeing Maxwell Raid, really seeing him for perhaps the first time. Not as her boss, not as a billionaire CEO, but as a man facing the most human of challenges, the prospect of becoming a parent. We could discuss this option, she said carefully, but I'd need to think about it, really think about what it would mean for me professionally, personally. Raid nodded. Take all the time you need. He gestured to the leather portfolio still untouched on the table, and take that with you. Read through it. It's still an option if you prefer that route. As Alexandra prepared to leave an hour later, the conversation replaying in her mind, she realized something had fundamentally shifted between them. Whatever came next would change both their lives forever, but for the first time since discovering her pregnancy, she felt something close to hope. Alexandra woke to the sound of her phone buzzing frantically on her nightstand. She squinted at the clock. 6:17 a.m. Too early for normal calls. She reached for her phone and saw 15 missed calls, 23 text messages, and dozens of notifications from news apps and social media. Her stomach dropped as she opened the first text from Catherine. "Turn on the TV, now." With shaking hands, she grabbed the remote and switched on the morning news. Her own face stared back at her from the screen, a professional headshot from the Reed Enterprises website, alongside a photo of Maxwell Reid at a charity gala last year. The headline below read, Billionaire CEOs CCC Reid AFTAL. Pregnant LA carrying two irons. No, Alexandra whispered, turning up the volume. Sources within Reid Enterprises confirm that Senior Counsel Alexandra Winters is expecting twins fathered by CEO Maxwell Reid following an affair that began during a business trip to Tokyo, the perfectly coiffed news anchor said with barely concealed delight. Neither Reid nor Winters has made a statement, but insiders suggest the pregnancy has caused turmoil within the company. Alexandra's phone rang again. "Reid. Did you see?" she asked the moment she answered, her voice tight with panic. "I'm sending a car," he said, his tone clipped and professional. "Be ready in 15 minutes. Don't talk to anyone. Don't answer your door." Before she could respond, he had hung up. Alexandra jumped out of bed, ignoring the wave of nausea that hit her. She threw on the first professional outfit she could find, black pants and a loose blouse that still fit her changing body. As she brushed her teeth, her phone kept buzzing with notifications and calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Journalists, she realized with growing horror. How had this happened? She and Reid had been so careful. Only a handful of people knew the truth, Reid's inner circle, her sister Catherine. Someone had leaked the story, but who? And why now, when she and Reid were still deciding how to handle the situation? The doorbell rang, followed by insistent knocking. Alexandra froze, toothbrush still in her mouth. "Ms. Winters. Lisa Chen from Channel 4 News. We'd love to get your side of the story." More voices joined in from the hallway outside her apartment. Alexandra's heart pounded in her chest as she realized her building was probably crawling with reporters. She spat out her toothpaste and quickly finished getting ready, grabbing only her purse and phone. Her own phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Kevin, Reid's security. I'm at your back entrance. Come down the service elevator. 3rd floor." Alexandra took a deep breath and slipped out her door, ignoring the shouts from the reporters camped in her hallway. She took the service stairs down to the 3rd floor and found a stern-faced man in a suit waiting by the service elevator. "Ms. Winters," he nodded. "This way, please." They descended to the garage level where a black SUV with tinted windows waited. Kevin hustled her inside, and they pulled away just as photographers spotted them, camera flashes going off like lightning. "Where are we going?" Alexandra asked, heart still racing. "Reid Enterprises," Kevin replied. "Mr. Reid is already there." Meanwhile, at Reid Enterprises headquarters, the atmosphere was chaotic. Employees whispered in corners, pretending to work while refreshing news sites for updates. Security had been doubled at every entrance to keep reporters at bay. In the executive conference room, Reid sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of cold fury as Vivian Chen paced the room. "It had to be someone in this room," Reid said, looking at each of his trusted advisors. No one else knew the details. "With respect, sir," Daniel Powell, his attorney, interjected, "Ms. Winters' sister knew. And these things have a way of spreading." "Catherine wouldn't do this to me," Alexandra said from the doorway, having just arrived. Everyone turned to look at her, and she felt suddenly self-conscious under their scrutiny. She's a family court attorney. She knows better than anyone what media attention does to cases like this. Reid stood, his expression softening slightly at the sight of her. "Are you all right? Did they follow you?" Alexandra shook her head. "Your security team got me out through the back." She took a seat at the table, noticing how some of Reed's team avoided meeting her eyes. What do we know? Vivian handed her a tablet showing several news sites running the story. It broke at 5 a.m. Someone spoke to at least 3 major outlets and several tabloids. They knew specific details: Tokyo, the twins, even that you had a doctor's appointment confirming the pregnancy just over a week ago. Alexandra felt sick. Someone had been watching her closely. The stock? She asked, her legal mind kicking into gear despite her personal distress. Thomas Kim, the CFO, grimaced. Down 18 points in pre-market trading. The board called an emergency meeting for noon. They'll ask for your resignation, Alexandra said to Reid, stating what everyone in the room knew. Reid nodded once, his jaw tight. Let them try. Their strategy session was interrupted by Reid's assistant rushing in. Sir, I'm sorry, but the Peterson family is on line 1. Mr. Peterson says it's urgent. Reid and Alexandra exchanged looks. The Peterson acquisition, worth billions, had been her project for months. If it fell through because of this scandal. Put him through, Reid said, pressing the speaker button on the conference phone. Reid, came a gruff voice. What the hell is this mess I'm reading about? Howard, Reid replied calmly. I was planning to call you myself once we had a statement prepared. My board is having kittens, Peterson snapped. We can't be associated with a scandal. My daughter's showing me these tabloid headlines, not the kind of business partner we had in mind. Alexandra felt her cheeks burn with shame. She had worked so hard to structure the Peterson deal. Now it was falling apart because of her personal life. Howard, Reid said, his voice level, the press has sensationalized what is ultimately a private matter between 2 adults. I assure you, Reid Enterprises remains the same stable, profitable company you agreed to partner with. My family has values, Reid. Old-fashioned ones, maybe, but they've served us well for 3 generations. I'm not sure we can move forward under these circumstances. Before Reid could respond, Alexandra leaned forward. Mr. Peterson, this is Alexandra Winters. A moment of awkward silence followed. Ms. Winters, I didn't realize you were there. Yes, sir, I understand your concerns. The deal we structured together would save over 3,000 jobs at your manufacturing plants while giving you access to our global distribution network. Those facts haven't changed because of my personal situation. Well, that may be true, but your granddaughter Amy starts college next fall, doesn't she? UC Berkeley, studying environmental science. She'd be proud to see your company leading the industry in sustainable manufacturing, which our partnership would facilitate. Another pause. You remember that from our dinner conversation. That was months ago. I remember everything about our negotiations, Mr. Peterson, Alexandra said firmly. Because I care about this deal and what it means for both our companies. The line went quiet for a moment. Let me speak with my board, Peterson finally said. No promises, but we'll talk again. When the call ended, the room remained silent until Vivian spoke. We need a statement. Now, and a plan for the board meeting. Reid nodded, his eyes still on Alexandra. Daniel, work with Vivian on the statement. Thomas, prepare the financial projections showing minimal impact. Linda, brief HR on how to handle employee questions. He paused. I need the room. Everyone except Ms. Winters. The team filed out, leaving Reid and Alexandra alone in the large conference room. Through the glass walls, they could see employees staring, quickly looking away when caught. Are you really all right? Reid asked once they were alone, his voice softer than before. Alexandra wiped away a tear that had escaped despite her efforts to remain composed. No. My career is in shambles. I'll always be the pregnant lawyer who slept with the boss, no matter what I accomplish. She looked up at him. But I don't have the luxury of falling apart right now. Reid sat down beside her, closer than was strictly professional. I've made a decision, he said quietly. No more hiding. No more damage control. It's time for a different approach. What are you thinking? Alexandra asked, surprised by the resolve in his voice. I'm thinking, Reid said, reaching out to briefly touch her hand, that it's time to show them who we really are. Alexandra paced her sister's living room, unable to sit still despite Catherine's attempts to make her comfortable. The small TV in the corner was muted, but Alexandra could still see her own face flashing across the screen every few minutes as news outlets continued to dissect her personal life. "You should eat something," Catherine said, offering a plate of toast. "For the babies, if not for yourself." Alexandra took a piece of toast without really seeing it, her mind elsewhere. Raid's team had smuggled her out of the company headquarters after their meeting and brought her to Catherine's apartment on the other side of town. It was the one place reporters wouldn't immediately think to look. "He's really going to do this," Alexandra murmured, more to herself than her sister. "He's going to face it head-on." "Do what exactly?" Catherine asked, skepticism clear in her voice. She had never trusted Raid, even before all this. "What's his grand plan?" Before Alexandra could answer, her attention was drawn to the TV. The breaking news banner flashed across the bottom of the screen as the scene switched to a hastily assembled press conference. Raid stood alone at a podium outside Raid Enterprises headquarters, facing a sea of reporters and flashing cameras. Alexandra quickly unmuted the TV, her heart pounding. "Recently, news has circulated regarding my personal life," Raid began, his voice steady despite the pressure. He looked different somehow, still commanding, but with a vulnerability she'd rarely seen in him. "I wish to confirm that I am expecting children with Alexandra Winters, who has been an invaluable legal counsel to this company." The reporters erupted in questions, shouting over each other to be heard, but Raid simply raised his hand for silence. "I regret the circumstances have become public in this manner, but I do not regret the children. I intend to be fully present in their lives." Catherine gasped beside her. Did he jest? Alexandra couldn't speak, her eyes fixed on the screen. This wasn't what they had planned. Yes, Raid had mentioned a different approach, but she'd expected a carefully crafted statement written by his PR team, not this raw, honest declaration. "Ms. Winters and I will be making arrangements that respect both our professional relationship and our future responsibilities as parents," Raid continued. "I ask that the media respect her privacy during this time. She is a brilliant attorney who deserves to be known for her legal mind, not for her connection to me." His words touched something deep inside Alexandra. In all their discussions about damage control, Raid had never spoken about protecting her reputation, her career. "As for the rumors regarding my position at Raid Enterprises," he added, glancing briefly at the company's towering headquarters behind him, "I founded this company 20 years ago. I have led it through challenges far greater than this personal matter. I have no intention of stepping down, and I have the full support of our executive team." Alexandra knew that last part wasn't entirely true. Several board members had already called for his resignation, but she admired his confidence. "That's all I have to say for now," Raid concluded. "Thank you." He stepped away from the podium, ignoring the barrage of questions that followed him. The news cut back to the studio, where commentators immediately began analyzing his statement. "I can't believe he did that," Catherine said, staring at the screen in shock. "He actually claimed responsibility. Publicly." Alexandra was equally stunned. In the business world, this kind of personal revelation was unprecedented. CEOs kept their private lives tightly controlled, their images carefully managed. What Reid had just done was either incredible bravery or career suicide, possibly both. Her private phone rang, the one only her family and closest friends had the number to. Reid's name flashed on the screen. She answered immediately. "What did you just do?" "What I should have done from the beginning," Reid replied, his voice tired but determined. "How are you holding up?" "I'm processing," she admitted. "You didn't run that statement by your PR team, did you?" "No," he said simply. "Some things shouldn't be filtered through committees and focus groups." Catherine watched her closely, clearly trying to figure out what Reid was saying. "The board's going to fight you on this," Alexandra warned him. "Let them try. I still hold 40% of the company's voting shares. They can't force me out without a major battle, and they know it." There was a pause. "Alexandra, I'm offering a different arrangement. One that might serve all of us better than hiding." She felt her breath catch. "What kind of arrangement?" "A partnership," Reid said after a moment. "Not just for the children, but professionally as well. You've proven your value to this company time and again. The Peterson situation today only confirmed what I already knew. You're the best lawyer we have." She glanced at the TV, where financial analysts were now predicting the impact on Raid Enterprises stock. You're not thinking clearly. The company's in crisis mode. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, Raid countered. Crisis has a way of cutting through the noise. I want to promote you to general counsel. Alexandra nearly dropped her phone. What? In the middle of this scandal? People will think. I don't care what people think, Raid interrupted. You've earned it. Your work on the Peterson acquisition alone justifies the promotion. Maxwell, be serious, she said, reverting to his first name without thinking. No one will believe I earned it. They'll say it's hush money or worse. Then we prove them wrong, he replied simply. We do what we do best. We work. We win cases, we close deals, we build the company. Success is the best answer to criticism. Despite everything, Alexandra felt a flutter of hope. Her career had always been her foundation, the one thing she could rely on. The thought of not having to give it up, of actually advancing despite her complicated personal situation, it was more than she had dared to hope for. I need to think about this, she said finally. It's a lot to process in one day. Take all the time you need, Raid assured her. But know that my offer is sincere. This isn't about damage control anymore. It's about building something that works for all of us, including the twins. After they hung up, Catherine looked at her expectantly. Well, what did the great Maxwell Raid have to say for himself? Alexandra sat down, suddenly exhausted by the day's events. He offered me a promotion to general counsel. Catherine's eyes widened. You're kidding. He says he wants to form a partnership for the babies, but also professionally. Catherine studied her sister's face. And you're considering it? It wasn't a question, but Alexandra nodded anyway. Is that crazy? After everything that's happened? Catherine sighed, sitting down beside her. Look, I still don't trust him. Men with that much power rarely do anything that doesn't benefit them somehow. She squeezed Alexandra's hand. But I've never seen you back down from a challenge. If anyone can make this work, whatever this is, it's you. Alexandra placed her free hand on her stomach, thinking about the twins growing inside her. They would be born into a complicated world, with parents whose relationship defied simple explanation. But maybe there was a way forward that didn't require sacrificing everything she'd worked for. Outside, the sun was setting on the most chaotic day of her life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more press, more questions, more judgments. But for the first time since seeing that positive pregnancy test, Alexandra felt something like hope taking root alongside her fear. The weeks that followed brought a storm unlike anything Alexandra had ever experienced. She stood at her apartment window, watching the rain pour down over the city, a fitting match for the chaos that had engulfed her life. The reporters had finally left her building after 2 solid weeks of camping outside, but the damage to her privacy had already been done. Her phone buzzed with another text from her mother back in Michigan. The 5th one today. Ever since the news broke nationally, her parents had been calling constantly. Their disappointment was palpable, even through the phone. We raised you better than this, her father had said during their first conversation after the scandal broke. Getting involved with your boss, what were you thinking? Her mother had been quieter but no less hurt, asking repeatedly how this would affect her career, her future, her reputation. Alexandra hadn't told them yet about Raid's offer to make her general counsel. They wouldn't understand that it wasn't a payoff but recognition of her abilities. They wouldn't believe that she had earned it. A knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Catherine, arms full of groceries and a determined expression on her face. Enough moping, her sister announced, pushing past her into the apartment. I'm making you real food. Those babies need more than the takeout you've been living on. Alexandra managed a small smile. I haven't been moping. I've been working remotely. Same thing, Catherine replied, unpacking vegetables and placing them on the counter. You hide behind that laptop all day, fielding emails and avoiding decisions. She wasn't entirely wrong. Alexandra had been working from home since the scandal broke, handling legal matters remotely while the media frenzy continued. Raid had respected her need for space, communicating mostly through professional channels, with occasional texts checking on her well-being. He hadn't pressured her about his offer, but the position remained open. I got a call from the Bar Association today, Alexandra said quietly, helping her sister unpack the groceries. Someone filed an ethics complaint against me. Catherine stopped, a bunch of carrots in her hand. What? On what grounds? Conflict of interest. Improper relationship with a client. Alexandra's voice was flat. She'd been expecting this. They're opening an investigation. That's ridiculous. You weren't his personal attorney. You represent the company. Doesn't matter. The optics are bad. Alexandra leaned against the counter, suddenly exhausted. I could lose my license, Kath. Everything I've worked for gone. Catherine put down the groceries and hugged her sister tight. We'll fight it. I know plenty of lawyers on the ethics committee. This is a personal matter being weaponized against a successful woman. We won't let them win. Alexandra nodded against her sister's shoulder, drawing strength from her certainty. Catherine had always been the fighter in the family, the one who stood up first against injustice. Alexandra was the diplomat, the one who found compromise and middle ground. Now she needed some of her sister's fire. Her phone rang. Reed Enterprises number. Ms. Winters, came Vivian Chen's crisp voice when she answered. We need you in the office tomorrow. The Peterson family is requesting a meeting, and they specifically asked for you to be present. Alexandra's heart sank. The Peterson deal, the one she'd worked so hard on, the one that had been put on hold when the scandal broke. Are they terminating the acquisition? They didn't say, just that they want to meet, and you need to be there. Vivian paused. How are you holding up? The question caught Alexandra off guard. Vivian had always been coolly professional, never personal. I'm managing. Good. The media interest is dying down. It's time to get back to business. Another pause. Reid needs you on this, Alexandra. We all do. After they hung up, Alexandra turned to Catherine. I have to go into the office tomorrow. For the Peterson deal. Catherine nodded, returning to her cooking. Good. Getting back to work might be exactly what you need. The next morning, Alexandra stood in front of her closet, considering her options carefully. Her body was changing. At 12 weeks pregnant with twins, her normal suits were getting tight around the waist. She finally selected a navy dress with a supple A-line cut that accommodated her slightly rounded belly without emphasizing it, paired with a structured blazer that gave her a sense of armor. When the elevator doors opened at Reid Enterprises, the office went eerily quiet. Employees stared openly, some whispering behind their hands, others quickly pretending to be busy. Alexandra held her head high, walking purposefully toward the conference room where the Peterson meeting would be held. Reid was already there, along with Thomas Kim and Vivian Chen. He stood when she entered, his eyes taking in her appearance with a warmth that made her both uncomfortable and reassured. Alexandra, he said simply. Thank you for coming in. She nodded professionally. The Petersons requested me specifically. Yes, Reid confirmed. Howard Peterson called yesterday. Said he wouldn't discuss moving forward unless you were at the table. Before she could respond, the door opened and Howard Peterson walked in, followed by his son and 2 members of their legal team. Alexandra straightened her shoulders, preparing for an uncomfortable confrontation. Ms. Winters, Peterson said, his weathered face unreadable as he shook her hand firmly. Good to see you again. Mr. Peterson, she replied carefully. I understand you wanted to discuss the acquisition. Yes, he said, taking a seat at the table. My board has been hesitant since the news broke. He glanced between her and Reid. Family values and all that. Alexandra felt her cheeks warm but maintained her professional demeanor. I understand your concerns, but I assure you the legal framework of our deal remains sound. Peterson studied her for a moment. You know, when I first heard the news, I thought this was exactly the kind of mess we wanted to avoid. Drama, scandal, complicated personal situations. He shook his head. But then my granddaughter Amy, the one heading to Berkeley, she had some interesting things to say. Alexandra waited, unsure where this was going. She told me I was being an old-fashioned hypocrite. Peterson continued with a surprising chuckle. Said that judging a business deal based on personal relationships was exactly the kind of thinking that kept women from advancing in business for decades. She said what matters is competence, not whether someone fits into some outdated model of propriety. Reid leaned forward slightly. Your granddaughter sounds like a wise young woman. She's a pain in my backside most days, but she's not wrong, Peterson admitted, which is why I'm here. He looked directly at Alexandra. "I don't care about the tabloid headlines, Ms. Winters. What I care about is whether you're still the same brilliant attorney who'd structured a deal that saves my family's company while preserving jobs and expanding our reach." Alexandra felt something tight in her chest loosen for the first time in weeks. "I am Mr. Peterson, and I'm prepared to walk you through any concerns your board might have." "Good." Peterson nodded firmly. "Because the deal is back on the table. My family has been in business for 3 generations. We've weathered worse storms than this." For the next 2 hours, Alexandra led the meeting, addressing concerns, explaining legal details, and recommending adjustments to reassure the Peterson board. It felt incredible to be doing what she did best, practicing law, solving problems, building something valuable. By the time Peterson and his team left, the deal was not only back on track, but strengthened with additional safeguards Alexandra had developed during her weeks working from home. As the door closed behind the Peterson team, Reid turned to her with undisguised admiration. "That was masterful." "I was just doing my job," she replied, though she couldn't keep the satisfaction from her voice. "No," Reid shook his head. "You saved a multi-billion-dollar deal that even my best negotiators thought was dead. You didn't just do your job, you proved why you're irreplaceable to this company." Later that afternoon, as Alexandra gathered her things to leave, Vivian stopped by her office. "The board meeting has been scheduled for Friday. They'll be voting on Reid's leadership and the new executive structure." Alexandra looked up. "Will they try to force him out?" "They'll try," Vivian said with a small, knowing smile. "But after today's win with Peterson, Reid's position is stronger than ever. And by the way," she paused at the door, "that general counsel office on the executive floor, it's being prepared, just needs someone to claim it." As Alexandra left the building, she felt eyes on her again. But this time, some of the stares held something like respect. She had faced the reckoning that had threatened to destroy her career and found that perhaps she wasn't as professionally damaged as she had feared. The twins continued growing inside her, unaware of the storms their existence had created or the new possibilities that were emerging from the chaos. For the first time in weeks, Alexandra walked with her head truly high, no longer just pretending confidence, but actually feeling it again. The confidence of a woman who knew her worth wasn't defined by scandal or gossip, but by the value she created and the strength she showed when facing life's unexpected turns. 6 months had passed since the scandal broke, transforming Alexandra's life in ways she never could have imagined. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of her new office, a spacious corner suite on the executive floor with views of the city park. The nameplate on her door read Alexandra Winters, General Counsel, a title she had officially held for 4 months now. She leaned back in her chair, one hand resting on her very prominent belly. At 8 months pregnant with twins, her body had changed dramatically. Her doctor had warned her that carrying twins often meant an early delivery, but Alexandra was determined to work until the very end. She had redesigned her office with comfort in mind, an ergonomic chair that supported her back, a small couch for when she needed to put her feet up, and a mini fridge stocked with healthy snacks and water. The past months had been a storm of work and adaptation. After the Peterson deal was successfully closed, bringing a much-needed win to Reid Enterprises, the board had reluctantly backed down from their attempts to force Reid out. His public acknowledgement of the pregnancy and his refusal to hide had gradually shifted public opinion. What had started as a salacious scandal had slowly evolved into something closer to acceptance, even admiration in some circles. Alexandra scrolled through her emails, smiling slightly at a message from the Women in Corporate Law Association. They had invited her to be their keynote speaker at next year's conference, focusing on navigating personal challenges in a professional environment. The irony wasn't lost on her, becoming a reluctant role model because of a situation she'd never planned. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Ms. Winters, Mr. Reid is here to see you." "Send him in, please," she replied, straightening some papers on her desk. Reid entered, looking much the same as always in his perfectly tailored suit, though the past months had added a few more strands of silver to his dark hair. The stress had taken its toll on him too, though he managed it with the same controlled grace he applied to everything. "The nursery renovations are finished at both houses," he said without preamble, placing architectural photos on her desk. I thought you might want to see. Alexandra picked up the photos, examining them with interest. They had worked out an arrangement that surprised everyone: separate residences but shared parenting. Reed had purchased a townhouse just 10 minutes from his own home, insisting Alexandra needed a place with more space and security now that she was on the executive team and about to become a mother of twins. "They're beautiful," she said, genuinely impressed. The nurseries were mirror images of each other, one in her new home, one in his, ensuring the babies would feel at home in both places. Soft green walls, natural wood furniture, and supple animal decorations created warm, peaceful spaces for the twins. "I had the security systems upgraded at your place too," Reid added, taking a seat across from her. "And the night nurse starts next week. She'll alternate between our homes depending on where the babies are." Alexandra nodded, appreciative of his practicality. Their arrangement was unconventional but carefully structured, with clear boundaries and expectations. They weren't a couple in the traditional sense. Whatever attraction had flared between them that night in Tokyo had been channeled into a different kind of partnership. They were co-parents and colleagues who respected each other's abilities and shared common goals. "How was the board meeting?" she asked, changing the subject to business. Reid smiled slightly. "Better than expected. The quarterly numbers helped. We're up 17% from last year. The Peterson integration is being called a model acquisition. Your legal team's handling of the regulatory challenges impressed everyone." "Good," Alexandra said, feeling a rush of pride. She had built a strong legal department, bringing in talented attorneys who respected her for her legal mind rather than gossiping about her personal life. It had taken time, but she had earned their loyalty through competence and hard work. "There's something else," Reid said, his tone shifting slightly. "The profile piece in Business Weekly. They want to interview both of us." Alexandra sighed. The media's interest had never fully disappeared, though it had evolved from tabloid gossip to more serious coverage. What angle are they taking? Modern leadership. How companies adapt to personal challenges. The changing face of corporate America. Reid shrugged. "Their words, not mine. I told them I'd discuss it with you first." She considered it, weighing the pros and cons. It might help normalize things further. Show that we found a way forward that works professionally. "My thoughts exactly," Reid nodded. "Though they'll undoubtedly try to dig into the personal aspects as well." Alexandra winced suddenly, placing a hand on her side. Reid's expression changed immediately. "Are you all right?" "Fine," she assured him. "Just a kick." "They're getting stronger." After a moment's hesitation, she asked, "Do you want to feel? They're really active today." A flash of uncertainty crossed Reid's face before he nodded and moved to her side of the desk. Alexandra took his hand and placed it on the side of her belly. The twins obliged with a series of strong kicks. Reid's expression softened in a way few people ever witnessed. "That's incredible." "And occasionally painful," Alexandra added with a small laugh. The moment was interrupted by her assistant knocking before entering with a stack of contracts. "The Henderson agreements for your review, Ms. Winters." "Thank you, Diane," Alexandra said as her assistant placed the documents on her desk and left. Reid returned to his seat, his professional demeanor slipping back into place. "The legal team can handle those. You should be cutting back your hours." "I'm fine," she insisted. "Dr. Liu says my health is excellent, and work keeps me focused." She smiled slightly. "Besides, the Henderson case is interesting. Patent law always is." Reid studied her for a moment, then nodded in acceptance. He had learned over the months not to try to manage her. Their relationship worked because they respected each other's independence. "There's a charity gala next week," he said, changing the subject. "For children's education, the company usually has a strong presence." "Are you asking if I want to attend?" Alexandra clarified. "If you feel up to it. As general counsel, your presence would be appropriate." He paused. "We would arrive separately, of course." Alexandra considered it. She had mostly avoided public social events since the scandal broke, focusing on work and preparation for the babies. But perhaps it was time to step back into that world. "I'll think about it," she said finally. As Ray prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "Alexandra, I wanted to say." He seemed to search for the right words. unusual for a man typically so articulate. "I'm proud of what we've built. This arrangement. The way we've handled things. It's not what either of us planned, but it works," she finished for him, in its own way. He nodded, a rare genuine smile crossing his face. Yes, it works. After he left, Alexandra turned back to her window, looking out at the city below. Her life had been appended, examined by strangers, judged by colleagues, but she had survived the storm. More than survived, she had found a way to thrive despite the challenges. Her hands cradled her belly, feeling the movements of the two lives that had changed everything. They would be born into unusual circumstances, with parents whose relationship defied easy categorization. But they would also have advantages many children never received, not just financial security, but parents who have learned to put ego aside in favor of practical solutions. Alexandra's phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Lunch tomorrow? Need to hear all about the nursery photos." She smiled as she replied. Some things remained wonderfully constant even as everything else changed. Whatever came next, motherhood, new professional challenges, the continuing evolution of her unusual relationship with Reid, Alexandra felt ready to face it. The scandal that had once threatened to destroy her had instead forced her to build something new, something stronger than she could have imagined when she first walked into Reid's office with life-changing news all those months ago. The twins kicked again, as if in agreement. Their story was just beginning.